like it's really, really difficult to sort of try and work out what it is that actually draws you to that face out of a whole lot of other faces. And I've been thinking about it, and I've kind of narrowed it down to that they either remind me of somebody, and that person could be myself. And I suspect it quite often is myself. And it's also trying to, I guess basically what it could be also is that I'm trying to sort of reinvent, re-narrate scenarios, and just seen somebody and I've gone, something's fired in my brain, like you were, and I think I was actually telling Dan the other day that when we came out of Mass one day, and I was pretty young, these guys like crammed into a Humber 80, drove into the car park, and they did this, they did a burnout, and as they came zooming out, I'm convinced he locked eyes with me, like this guy and his kind of tags and stuff. And it was another thing, like when I was to get this camera, it's kind of like, oh, right, where's that guy? I mean, obviously, it was like 15 years later, but it's in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And, and I'm still subconsciously looking for that person.
Yeah.
Because he really challenged my ideas of kind of like, good and bad. Like you can be good, but not very nice. Or you can be bad and you can be fun or nice. Like, and it was a conundrum that was presented me, and these guys having a lot of fun doing burnouts.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, I think that's also like really interesting in terms of how even a reader like brings their own kind of subconscious and their own experiences, especially when looking at portraits of other people. It's always kind of building on those experiences or those faces that you've seen and your associations with them. So I think like the kind of ambiguity in your work about these people as well is really important, because there isn't necessarily like a clear story or a clear narrative, or even like you're not framing them in a very specific way, but just their actual faces and their gestures and everything creates all these questions as well.
And that could be interacting with I mean, I was like 19, 20 and very much a beginner, and I was using a roll effects and a medium format camera, which, by that early 80s, obviously people really stopped using that sort of thing. They would sort of go, oh, she's using a box brownie. And I think that sometimes the sort of like the interaction that people are seeing, the look on is actually amusement, because I looked pretty incompetent. Like I was just going, wait, hang on, wait.
Yeah.
Oh, and in a way, and then I would sort of like look up, and they'd been posing for a few minutes, and by then they were kind of like, over it, all but bored, or just going, and that's when I find the shot. Sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's so much more interesting though. Like, that kind of breaking through the like the performance, or let the performance kind of hang around a little too long, that something else starts to shine through. So this is kind of going back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier, but children do make up a lot of the subjects in P.North. Was there like a specific reason for this?
I mean, childhood was a place that I had recently left. It's a place I'm very familiar with. It's very fresh, and also when you're 18, 19, 20, basically I was dragged screaming out of childhood. Not that it was a blissful place, but there was nothing out there that particularly inspired me to want to become an adult any sooner than what I had to.
Yeah.
And again, it was sort of like, it's strangely a form of self-portraiture as well. And there's obviously an unguardedness, and they still, and I've mentioned this before too, they still have their dreaming in them. It hasn't been squashed out of them yet.
Yeah.
And with that is a fearlessness that I felt in me I was losing.
Yeah.
And I was trying to hold on to it vicariously.
Yeah.
Because growing up, so it was something I didn't want to do.
Yeah. Well, I think you do get a real sense of that through looking at the difference in the portraits between the children and the adults. In that so many of the kids are just so like, you know, kind of bigger gestures or performance, and they're even if they're not necessarily comfortable in front of the camera, there's this kind of like looseness, or they kind of take up more space.
Yes.
So I think that really comes across in the photos. You get this amazing sense of like potential or vitality or something, that whereas the adults, that's not to say that that's completely lost, but there's a bit more of a kind of like self-consciousness, or there's more kind of experience that's dictating how they should kind of behave in front of the camera, or more of a suspicion or something. Something that we've talked about in the past is kind of difficulty in naming this body of work. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
I came up with a couple of, a little list of single word titles, but I felt it was too directed. It was the risk of it being misconstrued or understood to be the mindset of the people in the book. I didn't want that to be a label or labelled. And so, I just decided to have something that was really kind of, I don't want to use the word vague, but it was neutral. And a shorthand for something. And PNorth could be anywhere.
It's a very ambiguous place name, or there's kind of no immediate connections in the title.
That's it. And considering I really worked hard to have a sense of non-place in the book. So it was a struggle, but I'm pleased with PNorth.
I think it's also like the title, and especially kind of naming it after a place, but in such a kind of ambiguous setting, is that it kind of speaks to this idea of like traveling to kind of an unknown location as well. Which I think you really get a sense of in the book with the amount of kind of roads and landscapes that are presented throughout the sequence, but then this whole idea of just traveling through and passing new faces and things like that. So I feel like it feels really appropriate to name it after somewhere you might just spot on the map and not know anything about, kind of thing.
And I feel that the roads and the landscapes in it really are so kind of strangely directionless, even though they're heading somewhere. And
I think that's something like that strangeness is something that really comes through with all the images. There's this kind of almost like eeriness, or they always kind of present questions rather than they always make you kind of double back or look again. Is that something that you kind of intentionally sought out, or is it something that you kind of stumbled upon, or kind of in like collecting this body of work? Is that something that you kind of felt out later?
I guess I did have an imaginary place in mind, and anything that sort of corresponded with that, I photographed. And I guess the imaginary place was really an amalgamation of lines from books I read or movies. Yeah. I would go to the movies a lot, and I would say that there's a bit of an influence there. So it's almost like P.North could be a movie, and there's some stills. It could be, it's like I made up a country and out of the people who lived around me. And it's that strange thing that you have, like it's not a social document, it's not social documentary photos.
Yeah.
And people, once they sort of disabuse themselves of that notion and see it as like a rambling poetic letter, if you like, or an essay. It's I mean, obviously when I was photographing, I didn't have this sort of language. I mean, I was pretty unsophisticated. I just had this faraway notion, and what I photographed had to correspond with that. So consequently, I would, a roll of film which had like 12 shots. I could spend maybe a month getting the 12 shots, and so I. Like now people photograph and edit. Like I edited like probably over stringently. If I just sort of had stepped back and embraced a bit more, I probably would have taken like 3 times as many photographs as what I did.
Yeah.
But I was quite sure of what I wanted.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of like going out and finding it.
Yeah.
And that was enjoyable and consuming.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes like that, even though the kind of style of photography can be quite, feel quite loose and spontaneous, I feel like there's also a real, you get a good sense of intention, and it feels still very direct as well.
Yeah.
Even though, like you said, it's not social documentary where you are kind of trying to define something in a way, although I know some people would argue that that's not necessarily what social documentary kind of aims to do, but there has to be a more kind of direct, I guess, narrative or tone in the images with something like that. But because it's opening up more questions rather than statements in your images, it does feel very kind of meandering and poetic, and that it's more about kind of the moment of the photograph rather than what's before and what's after it kind of thing, or what is kind of happening around these people in their lives. It's just about them then and there, and you then and there, kind of thing.
I mean, like, even though I say it's not social documentary, I cannot ignore what was actually happening in the country at the time, which was the policies of the finance minister for the Labour Party, Roger Douglas, was sort of like really, the neo-conservatives love it today. Like it was very, very quite right-wing.
Yeah. So this was in the early 80s.
Yeah. And so essentially what really happened is that New Zealand was sort of opened up to kind of like private investment in money, and just turned from being like a manufacturing farming to kind of like the bulk was in finance. And they started doing that thing that we saw with the Kennett government do here and the Thatcher government. Like in 1 year, I believe that 8,000 New Zealand Post workers got sacked, redundant. So it was kind of it was really grim. It was a recession.
Yeah.
And I mean that kind of affected like how much work I would get. I mean, all my money went on petrol and fuel.
Yeah.
And developer. And to the point where I didn't print 90% of my work. There was the ones I thought, okay, that one and that one and that one and that one. So, up to about 10 years ago, I thought, I took maybe like 10 okay pictures. But what it did do is that it gave New Zealand a particular. I remember, put it this way, I remember standing in a queue and an American guy was in front of me and I could hear him say, New Zealand is like, 20 years ago. I mean, like it's really old fashioned. And I was like, really? I hadn't left the country, I had nothing to compare it with. And it's, how can you gauge kind of like, affluence of the country in a very superficial, quick glance is like clothes people wear. So recently somebody saw the photograph I had of the girl standing with the two brothers who can't see their faces.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, did you dress them up in these clothes? And I was like, no, that's they were because I babysat and that's what they wore.
Yeah.
And
Well, I guess like with anything, it's still, even if it's not necessarily about, trying to define a situation or kind of socioeconomic area or anything, everything is still within a context as well.
So those sort of forces, without me really acknowledging them or realising them, sort of shaped an aesthetic.
Yeah.